I just wanted to make sure he's doing okay," his boss said. I smiled politely and said, "Doing okay with what?" There was a pause on the other end, a long one. "After the accident," he replied. My husband had left for work that morning, just like always. Kissed me on the cheek, grabbed his travel mug, said he'd be home by 7. Just like he had every morning for the past 8 months. And now his boss, a man named Gerald Reynolds, whose voice I recognized from the one company Christmas party I'd attended 3 years ago, was calling to check on my husband's recovery from an accident I had never heard about. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear and the coffee I'd just poured going cold on the counter, and I felt something move through me that wasn't quite fear, and wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite anything I had a name for yet. It was more like the sensation of a floor that has been solid your entire life giving way beneath your feet. Not falling, not yet. Just the first terrifying moment of recognizing that the ground is no longer what you thought it was. But let me start from the beginning. Because the real story doesn't start with that phone call. It starts with a white dress shirt hanging on the back of a closet door, pressed and ready every single morning for a job my husband no longer had. I grew up in a suburb outside of Nashville, Tennessee, the kind of neighborhood where everybody knew what kind of car you drove and approximately how much you paid for it. I was 32 years old when everything happened, working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-size healthcare company, driving a sensible Honda, and living in the 3-bedroom colonial that my husband Mark and I had bought 4 years earlier when things were good and the future looked like something we were building together on purpose. Mark was a senior project engineer at a construction technology firm called Meridian Group. Good salary, good benefits, the kind of job that comes with a company email signature and a parking spot with your name on it, and the quiet prestige of being the person at a dinner party who explains what load-bearing walls are and why they matter. He was 35, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that he kept neat, and a laugh that arrived easily and often. And when we met at a mutual friend's birthday party 8 years before all of this, he had seemed like exactly the kind of man you build a life with. Steady, reliable, present. He remembered anniversaries without prompting. He fixed things around the house before I noticed they were broken. He called his mother every Sunday. These were not small things, or at least, they didn't seem small at the time, before I understood that a man can be very good at performing reliability, while privately dismantling everything that reliability was supposed to protect. We had a daughter named Sophie, who was 7, and a son named Caleb, who was 5, and our mornings had the particular organized chaos of a household that runs on schedules and lunches packed the night before, and the constant low-grade miracle of getting 2 children out the door without anyone crying. Mark left for work at 7:15 every morning, in one of the white dress shirts he kept in a row in the closet, pressed and ready, hanging on wooden hangers with the precision of a man who took pride in his appearance. He drove a silver Audi, his one indulgence, the car he'd wanted since he was 22 and had finally bought 3 years ago when the promotion came through. And he usually got home somewhere between 6:30 and 7, depending on traffic and whatever was happening at the job site, or so I believed. The white dress shirts were the symbol of all of it, the reliability, the professionalism, the man who had a place to be every morning and a reason to look the part. I would learn, eventually, what those shirts had actually been doing all those mornings. But not yet. Not for a long time. The first crack appeared so small I walked right past it. It was a Thursday evening in February, about 9 months before everything collapsed, and I was folding laundry on the bed, while Mark sat at his desk in the corner of the bedroom with his laptop open. I carried a stack of his shirts to the closet. Those white dress shirts, freshly laundered, lightly starched the way he liked. And when I slid open the closet door, I noticed something that registered, and then didn't register. The way things do when you're tired, and your brain is already 3 tasks ahead. There were too many shirts. Not dramatically too many, not a quantity that would have alarmed anyone paying full attention. But I had been doing his laundry for 6 years, and I knew how many shirts were in the regular rotation, and there were more than usual. I stood there for a moment, holding the stack in my arms, counting them in my head the way you count something you're not sure you're counting correctly. Then Caleb called from the bathroom that he needed help with his pajamas, and I closed the closet and went to help him, and I didn't think about the shirts again for months. That was the first thing I should have stopped and examined. I didn't. People rarely do when the alternative is believing that everything is fine. The strange calls started in March. Mark's phone would ring and he would glance at the screen, and then, if I was in the room, take it into the hallway or the garage or the backyard with a murmured work thing tossed back over his shoulder. I noticed the pattern the third or fourth time it happened. The glance at the screen, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way he always moved away before answering. I told myself it was a difficult project. I told myself he was managing a personnel issue and didn't want to talk about it in front of the kids. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative, the version of events where my husband of 8 years was hiding something significant, required a complete reorganization of my understanding of my own life, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Not over a few phone calls. But something had been disturbed in the architecture of my days. Some small but structural piece had shifted, and the unease settled into me, the way cold settles into a house when a window has been left open somewhere. Not dramatic, not immediately apparent, but persistent and pervasive, making everything slightly wrong without your being able to identify exactly where the draft is coming from. There was also the matter of the overtime. Starting in September of the previous year, 8 months before the phone call from Gerald Reynolds, Mark began working late. Not every night at first, 2 or 3 times a week, then 4, then 5. He'd text around 5 o'clock, running behind, don't wait on dinner. Or, job site issue, might be 10 before I'm home. The kids would eat without him, and I would put plates in the oven, and he would come home looking tired, in a way that I associated with long days and heavy responsibility, and the particular exhaustion of a man who takes his work seriously. I was proud of him for it. I said so, occasionally. He would smile and say thanks, babe, and eat his dinner, and ask about the kids' days, and go to bed at a reasonable hour, and everything looked exactly like what I thought it was. But I noticed, in a way I filed away without acting on, that the overtime had started at the exact same time that we had stopped being intimate. Not stopped dramatically, not with a fight or a conversation or any named acknowledgement. Just slowly, quietly, with the gentle and mutually unspoken attrition of 2 people who are too tired and too busy and who keep meaning to address something they both pretend isn't happening. I told myself it was the season, the stress, the kids, the weather, the 1,000 ordinary frictions of a busy household. I told myself these things with great conviction and moderate success, right up until the Thursday afternoon in April, when Gerald Reynolds called my cell phone to check on my husband's recovery, and I realized that I had been telling myself stories in a house built on a foundation that had been quietly rotting for 8 months. I handled the phone call the way you handle things when your brain hasn't caught up to your body yet, with composure that doesn't belong to you, borrowed from some automatic reserve that kicks in when the real you has temporarily vacated the premises. "He's doing okay," I told Gerald Reynolds, in a voice that was steady and warm and gave away nothing. "Thank you so much for thinking of him." Gerald said something about hoping Mark would be back on his feet soon, something about the team missing him, and I said all the right things and ended the call with my heart battering against my ribs like something trapped. I set the phone on the counter. The coffee was completely cold. Outside the kitchen window, Sophie's bicycle was leaning against the fence in the backyard, its pink streamers moving slightly in the April wind, and I stood very still and stared at it and thought, what accident? What recovery? What has my husband been doing every day for 8 months, if not going to work? I did not call Mark. I almost did. My thumb hovered over his contact for a long moment, and then I put the phone in my pocket and went to pick up the kids from school. I needed time to think before I said anything, needed to know more before I spoke, because the thing about confronting a lie before you understand its shape is that you give the liar the opportunity to reshape it before you've had a chance to see what it actually is. I had grown up watching my mother confront my father about things she half suspected, giving him just enough information to allow him to adjust his story. and I had made a quiet internal promise to myself years ago that I would never do that. If something was wrong, I would know exactly what was wrong before I opened my mouth about it. I picked up Sophie and Caleb, listened to Sophie describe a disagreement with her best friend about something involving a colored pencil, listened to Caleb insist that he was not tired, despite the fact that he fell asleep in the car within 3 minutes of us leaving the school parking lot. I drove home and made dinner and gave baths and read stories and said prayers and tucked them in, and all the while my mind was somewhere else entirely, moving through the architecture of the past 8 months and finding, in every room, a door I hadn't thought to open. After the kids were asleep, I went to Mark's home office. He wasn't home yet. Another late night, he'd texted at 5:30, which had a different flavor to it now than it had 2 hours ago. The office was a small room he used mostly for filing and occasional weekend work, with a desk and a filing cabinet and a bookshelf full of engineering reference books that he never touched. I sat in his chair and I opened his desk drawers one by one, not looking for anything specific, or maybe looking for everything at once. The top drawer, pens, a stapler, a phone charger I'd been looking for, nothing remarkable. The middle drawer, folders, paper clips, a stress ball shaped like a hard hat that someone had given him as a joke gift years ago. The bottom drawer was locked. I stared at the small brass lock for a moment. The desk had come with a key that we had put somewhere and never thought about again, because who locks a home desk drawer? I went to the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one that collected everything with nowhere else to go, and I found the key in under 2 minutes, underneath an expired coupon and a handful of rubber bands. The lock opened on the first try. Inside the drawer was a folder, and inside the folder were documents, and it took me approximately 90 seconds to understand that my husband had been fired from Meridian Group 7 months and 3 weeks ago, for cause. Following an internal HR investigation into conduct, I could only partially piece together from the termination letter. There was also a severance agreement, and underneath the severance agreement, a workers' compensation insurance claim for a back injury that had supposedly occurred on the job 2 months before the termination, an injury that, according to the claim, was still under evaluation and had resulted in temporary partial disability payments of $2,000 per month. An accident? A recovery? $2,000 a month going somewhere. I sat in my husband's office chair with the folder in my lap and the desk lamp the only light in the room, and I felt the floor finish giving way. But I hadn't even found the worst of it yet. That came the following morning, after Mark had left for work in his pressed white shirt, kissed me on the cheek, grabbed his travel mug, said he'd be home by 7. I waited 20 minutes after the Audi disappeared around the corner, and then I sat down at the family laptop, the shared one, not his work laptop, which he always took with him, and I started looking. I was not a suspicious person by nature, and I had no particular skill in this area. But it turns out that a motivated person with a shared family computer and a husband who had not thought to clear his browser history can find quite a lot in a single morning. The first thing I found was the real estate listing. A condominium in Green Hills, a neighborhood on the other side of Nashville, 2 bedrooms, modern finishes, listed for rent at $2,200 a month. The listing had been accessed 11 times from this computer over the past 6 weeks. The second thing I found was the email account. Not Mark's regular email. A Gmail address I had never seen, under a name that was his middle name paired with a number. The kind of account you create when you want something that isn't connected to the rest of your life. He had logged in on the family laptop 3 weeks ago, and the browser had saved the credentials. I opened it. There were 47 emails in the inbox. I read all of them. By the time I finished, I knew the following. My husband had been fired in August for having a relationship with a junior colleague named Brittany Cole, a 26-year-old project coordinator who had filed an HR complaint when the relationship ended badly. He had been collecting disability payments for an injury that his own doctor's notes, which I found attached to one of the emails, forwarded to Brittany with the subject line, "The insurance thing," described as mild lumbar strain, expected full recovery within 6 to 8 weeks. The injury had healed, the payments had continued, and the condominium in Green Hills, the one he had looked at 11 times on our family computer, was not for him. It was for Brittany. He had signed a lease guarantor agreement using his name and our joint credit as collateral 3 months ago, committing us to a $2,200 per month financial obligation I had never consented to or known about. I also found, in an email thread from 2 months earlier, a conversation between Mark and Brittany about money, specifically about the fact that he had transferred $34,000 from a savings account I had not known existed, funded with money he had skimmed from our joint account in small enough increments over 18 months that I had never noticed. $34,000. Gone. Into an account in his name alone, from which it had been transferred to Brittany's bank account in 6 installments. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before I found the emails, I found something else. Something that told me what I was dealing with before I understood the full extent of it. I called my best friend Dana first. Not because she had any particular expertise in what I was facing, but because she was the person I called when the world stopped making sense, and the world had very definitively stopped making sense. I drove to her house. The kids were at school. I had until 3. And I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything, from Gerald Reynolds' phone call to the locked drawer to the email account. And when I finished, Dana was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was choosing her next words very carefully. "Okay," she said finally, setting her coffee down. "Here's what you don't do. You don't confront him tonight. You don't let him know what you know." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "You call a lawyer today, before you do anything else." I already knew this. Hearing her say it made it real. I called a family law attorney named Patricia Graves that afternoon. Dana's cousin had used her during a difficult divorce and described her as someone who did not waste words or time. Patricia was in her 50s, with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head and the focused, unhurried efficiency of a woman who had sat across from 100 people in exactly the situation I was in and had learned exactly what to say and in what order. I laid out everything I knew. She listened without interrupting, made notes, and when I finished, she said, "The disability fraud is a separate issue from the marriage, but it's important because it tells us something about how he operates. A man willing to collect fraudulent insurance payments is a man willing to deceive systematically, and that pattern is going to matter in court." She told me to open a separate bank account immediately. She told me to photograph every document I had found and send the photos to myself and to her. She told me not to sign anything Mark put in front of me and not to move any marital assets. And she told me something that I filed away and returned to many times in the weeks that followed. The lease guarantor agreement is potentially actionable. He used your joint credit without your consent to guarantee another woman's apartment. That's not a gray area. I spent the next 10 days operating in 2 parallel realities simultaneously, and I will say this about that period. It was the most exhausting thing I have ever done, and also, in a strange way, the most clarifying. In one reality, I was the same wife and mother I had always been. I made dinners, attended school events, helped with homework, slept in the same bed as my husband, watched television beside him in the evenings, answered his questions about my day with normal-sounding answers. In the other reality, I was doing everything Patricia had told me to do, with the methodical focus of a person who has been handed a deadline and intends to meet it. I opened a personal checking account at a credit union across town. I photographed every document in the folder from the locked drawer and forwarded them to Patricia. I had a friend who worked in HR pull what she could find publicly about Brittany Cole, and confirmed that she was indeed a real person who had worked at Meridian Group until August of the previous year. I found the savings account Mark had used to siphon funds. It was at a different bank than our joint accounts, opened 3 years ago, showing 18 months of deposits ranging from $300 to $800, always just below the threshold that might have triggered a notification. And I found, on a Tuesday afternoon while Mark was still at work, the lease guarantor agreement itself, a printed copy filed behind the utility bills in the household filing cabinet, where he had apparently put it believing I never went through that section, which was correct. I never had, until then. I photographed it. I sent it to Patricia. She called me back within the hour. "This is exactly what I thought," she said, with the satisfaction of someone whose assessment has been confirmed. "He used your joint credit score as collateral without your knowledge or consent. Under Tennessee law, that's a tortious act. We can use this." The night before I confronted Mark, I did not sleep at all. I lay beside him in the dark, listening to him breathe, and I thought about the white dress shirts in the closet, about the morning after morning he had kissed me and said, "See you tonight," and driven away in his silver Audi and gone. Where? To Brittany's apartment, to coffee shops, to wherever people go when they are performing an entire life for the benefit of someone who trusts them. I thought about Sophie asking me once, about 6 months ago, why Daddy worked so many nights, and me telling her that his job was very important and people were counting on him, and the particular shame of that memory. Not because I had lied to her, I hadn't known, but because I had reinforced, with complete sincerity, a lie someone else was telling. I got up at 4 in the morning and went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table in the dark, and I allowed myself, for the first time since the phone call, to feel all of it. The grief of it, the fury of it, the specific sorrow of loving someone for 8 years and discovering that the version of them you loved was partly your own construction, built from what they showed you and what you chose to see. I felt all of it, and then I set it aside. Not forever, but for long enough to do what needed to be done. By 6 a.m., I had a plan. By 7 a.m., Mark's alarm went off, and he got up and pressed a white dress shirt and made his travel mug of coffee and came to the kitchen and kissed me on the cheek and said he'd be home by 7. I smiled and said, "Okay," and I watched him walk out the door for what would be the last time he did it, under the assumption that I didn't know. Patricia had advised me to have the confrontation with witnesses present, or at minimum to record it. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record a conversation I was participating in. I had the voice memo app open on my phone, in my cardigan pocket, before Mark pulled into the driveway that evening. Sophie and Caleb were at my mother's house. I had taken them there that afternoon under the pretense of a spontaneous sleepover, which they were thrilled about. The house was quiet. I had set 2 glasses of water on the kitchen table, which in retrospect seems like a very controlled thing to do. But control was what I had, and I was using all of it. Mark came through the garage door at 6:58, looking tired in the way he always looked tired, and set his keys on the hook by the door and said, "Hey, smells good. Did you cook?" I had cooked. I had also called Gerald Reynolds back that afternoon and had a 30-minute conversation that I would be referring to in approximately 5 minutes. "Sit down, Mark," I said, and my voice came out even, almost gentle, and that evenness was not something I had to manufacture. It arrived on its own, the way calm arrives when you have moved through the worst of the fear and come out the other side of it. He looked at me. Something in my voice or my face or the particular stillness of the house registered, and his posture shifted. A slight stiffening, barely perceptible, the body's response to an unidentified threat. "What's up?" he said, and his voice was careful, the voice of a man trying to determine what you know before he decides what to say. "Gerald Reynolds called me," I said. "Last week, to check on your recovery." I watched his face. The sequence of expressions was very fast. Surprise, recalculation, a flash of something that might have been panic. And then he made a decision. He chose denial. "Reynolds called you? I don't know why he'd call you directly. That's a little strange." "He called to check on your recovery," I said again, quietly. "From the accident, the one that happened 8 months ago, around the same time you were fired. The accident that you filed a workers' comp claim for. The claim you've been collecting $2,000 a month on." I paused. "Would you like to tell me about the accident, Mark? Or would you like to start somewhere else? We have a lot of ground to cover." The silence that followed was the kind you could measure. He stood very still on the other side of the kitchen island, his travel mug in his hand, and I watched him work through his options with the visible effort of a man who has planned for many contingencies, but not this specific one. He set the mug down on the counter with a deliberateness that was meant to look like composure, and instead looked like someone trying to prevent their hands from shaking. "I was going to tell you," he said, and his voice had dropped into a lower register, the voice of a man who has decided that contrition is his best available move. I was trying to figure out how. The firing, there were politics involved. It wasn't what it looked like, and I didn't want to worry you while I figured out the next step. "Brittany Cole," I said. The name landed between us like a stone dropped from a height. His face went through another sequence, this one slower, the expressions bleeding into each other, shock and calculation, and something that looked, briefly and painfully, like relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time, and has just been told they can put it down. He closed his eyes for a moment. "I made a mistake," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "You made several," I said. "You had a relationship with a colleague. You were fired for it. You filed a fraudulent insurance claim for an injury you recovered from in 6 weeks. You collected $2,000 a month in disability payments for 8 months. I paused. You opened a secret savings account and transferred $34,000 from our joint accounts over 18 months. You signed a lease guarantor agreement using our joint credit to secure an apartment for Brittany Cole, without my knowledge or consent." I looked at him across the kitchen island, across the water glasses and the dinner I had cooked, and the 8 years of a life I had believed in, and I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not yet, but its precursor. The stillness before a decision becomes irreversible. "I have the documents, Mark, all of them. My attorney has copies, and I need you to understand that I am not asking you to explain yourself, because there is no explanation for any of this that changes what it is. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that I know, and because what happens next is going to happen on my timeline, not yours." He tried several more things. He tried the full disclosure confession. "I'll tell you everything. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I want to fix this." He tried bargaining. "Can we please not do this tonight? Can we talk tomorrow? Can we try counseling?" He tried appealing to the children, which was the thing I had most anticipated and least wanted to hear. The reminder that Sophie and Caleb were sleeping at my mother's house tonight, and that what I was about to do would change their lives in ways neither of them were old enough to understand. I held on to what Patricia had told me. The children are not a reason to stay in a marriage built on fraud. They are a reason to model what it looks like to refuse to accept it. I told Mark to sleep in the guest room. I told him to get an attorney. I told him not to move any money from any account, and that if he did, Patricia would know within 24 hours, which was true, because I had already set up account alerts on everything and given Patricia online read-only access to the joint statements. He went to the guest room. I finished my dinner alone at the kitchen table, and the food tasted like nothing, and the house was very quiet, and I looked at the white dress shirt he had draped over the back of the chair when he came in. That pressed, careful, deliberate symbol of a man with somewhere to be, and I thought, that's the last one. He's run out of places to put it. What followed was a process rather than a moment, because real life almost never gives you the clean, dramatic resolution that a story might, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Patricia filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. The grounds were fault-based. Tennessee allows for fault divorce, and the evidence Patricia had assembled, which included the fraudulent disability claim, the undisclosed financial accounts, and the unauthorized guarantor agreement, gave us considerable leverage. The disability fraud was referred to the insurance company, who opened their own investigation. The monthly payments were clawed back, and Mark was required to repay them in full, plus interest. The $34,000 he had transferred to Brittany was treated by the court as dissipation of marital assets, meaning it was factored into the property settlement. I received a corresponding credit that effectively returned the money to me through the division of our accounts. The lease guarantor agreement was challenged by Patricia through a civil action. Brittany was required to find a new guarantor or vacate the apartment, and the binding obligation on our joint credit was dissolved. Mark lost the Audi in the settlement. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a complex on the east side of Nashville. He got a job, eventually, at a smaller engineering firm for considerably less than he had been making at Meridian Group, because the circumstances of his firing had made their way into his professional reference network in the way that circumstances in a small industry always do. The last I heard, through someone we both knew, he and Brittany had stopped seeing each other approximately 3 months after I filed for divorce, which I found unsurprising and which I experienced, when I heard it, with a flatness that I interpreted as the absence of the particular pain that would once have accompanied that information. My children adjusted in the way that children adjust, which is to say, imperfectly and gradually, and with a resilience that shames most adults. Sophie cried for 3 days and then asked if she could have her own room now that we were moving, which we were. The house was sold as part of the settlement, and I bought a smaller one, a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood I liked better anyway, with a yard and a good school district, and a front porch where I sometimes sat in the evenings after the kids were in bed and felt the particular quiet of a life that is smaller than it was, but more accurately sized to the people actually living in it. Caleb asked approximately once a week for the first month when Daddy was coming home, and each time I told him that Daddy had his own home now and that he would see him on the weekends, and eventually Caleb accepted this the way 5-year-olds accept most things, because it was simply the new shape of the world, and the world is what it is. The white dress shirts. Mark had left several of them behind in the closet. I found them when I was packing the house, pressed and hanging on their wooden hangers, lined up with the same deliberate precision he had always brought to them. I stood in the doorway of the closet for a long moment, looking at them. Then I took them down, all of them, folded them neatly, and put them in a donation bag. Someone else could use them. Someone who had an actual job to wear them to. I taped the bag shut and set it by the front door, and the next morning, I dropped it at the Goodwill on my way to take the kids to school. On the way back, I stopped at a coffee shop I liked, ordered a latte, and sat at a corner table by the window for 20 minutes before I had to be anywhere. The morning light came through the glass at an angle that hit the top of my coffee cup and turned it gold, and the coffee was good, and the chair was comfortable, and no one needed anything from me for 20 whole minutes. It was, in its modest and unspectacular way, exactly enough. I thought about that phone call, Gerald Reynolds' voice saying I just wanted to make sure he's doing okay. And I thought about how I had stood in my kitchen with the cold coffee and the pink bicycle streamers visible through the window and the floor giving way beneath my feet. And I thought about all the things that had been true that morning that I hadn't known yet, and all the things that were true now that I did know. And I thought, the difference between those 2 mornings is the most important work I have ever done. Not the attorney, not the court, not the settlement or the credit recovery or the house or any of the logistics of dismantling an 8-year marriage that had been secretly hollowed out from the inside. The most important work was sitting in my kitchen after the call and deciding not to pretend, not to explain away, not to perform the performance of a woman who is fine when she is standing in the middle of something that is very clearly not fine. I paid for my coffee, picked up my bag, and walked out into the morning, which was, like all mornings, simply what it was, ordinary and new and entirely mine.